Well, boys, girls, and of course gifted animals, this is of course your humblest and spiciest of uncles, here with a talk of all things. I know, wow, shock, horror. We're not going to do a food review tonight because my producers feel like I need to diversify my audience a little bit and get a little bit more political and delve deep into topics that may be uncomfortable to talk about. So I'm going to talk about them because we think it's going to garner higher ratings. And that's the only motivation. Thank you to you for listening in advance. And thank you, obviously, to Review Bra. Review Bra, who kind of started this whole thing. So, boom. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you for taking some time out of your day to listen to me talk about equal pay and specifically the wage gap. In this presentation and assignment, it is my position that when we're looking at the wage gap, and there does exist one, around 75 to 80 cents to a man's dollar, is that a fight that we are willing to take as a society? In this presentation, it's my intention to present to you some information, evidence, some facts, about the false notion that there exists active barriers to equal pay for women when compared to men. What I hope to illustrate is that while there is a gap, as I mentioned, for pay, the reason for it is based upon collective societal choice opposed to active discrimination. And that's an important distinction that we have to talk about if we want an honest discussion. And as a result, the wage gap is a fight that is only worth fighting for if we as a society change what we value. Until the vocal minority becomes the absolute majority, it is an obsolete cause to fight for. So with that, let's get started. For around 50 years now, there has been a law, specifically the Equal Pay Act, that was signed in 1963 by President Kennedy, that bans discrimination on account of gender. And obviously, with that, we think that, okay, well, that should mean that there shouldn't be much of a wage gap. Right now, today, the latest data suggests that women make around 80% of what men make. And so the question here is that reasonable? And is it something that can be explained? And then lastly, where does it come from? Where does that number come from? Now, we need to talk about the simple fact that men and women are different. It sounds simple, but it's very, very, very important. We're a sexually dimorphic species. We have very different physiological, psychological, and biochemical differences between the sexes of human beings. And so because of that, I think that it produces different behaviors and different choices. And as a society, with people in aggregate, we make decisions that are different between men and women. And that's just a simple fact that we need to talk about in order to baseline the discussion. I think that it's not really a debatable topic that men and women are different. So we need to move past that and talk about economics. And economics at its core are the study of trade-offs. You know, what am I going to give for something of perceived equal value? And so I think that's important here when we're talking about career choices and decisions that men and women make and how there is a difference between the two. You know, while as you may value something and you can quantify that with money, some things cannot be quantified with money, but there's still a value for it. And that's why I want to talk about economics in the terms of, okay, they're trade-offs. And it doesn't always have to be a dollar amount, but those trade-offs do show up in dollar amounts in terms of the workforce. And so while you're doing other activities, you're not going to get paid for them, obviously. And so when we add those things up, that's why the wage gap exists. Ultimately, in a free market economy, the wage earned in the workforce is the only measurable when comparing value. But it doesn't mean that value doesn't exist in other places. So the wage gap doesn't take into account choices, experience, hours worked, education, or the value of homemaking. And so what I'd like to put into your mind is the concept that equity does not mean equality. You can give everybody the same starting point, you know, and that's equality. Equity is where, okay, as you can see, the shorter kid has two boxes because he's the shortest, but now they can all look over the fence. But when we're treating things equally, we have one box per each individual, and the shortest kid isn't able to watch the game. So when we're looking at equity versus equality, men and women are very much equal, and we are given, as luckily a free people, the equal opportunity to do whatever we want. So with the equality and equity definitions that I've just provided, we have always been kind of a society that values equal pay for equal work. And I think that's the core of the debate. Are we putting equal pay for equal work? And I would argue yes, because when you're looking at the wage gap and how it's actually defined and how it's calculated, it's grossly simplistic. Let me explain. So you have the median income of every single woman in the United States. We're talking about the United States specifically. And then you talk about median income of men and you divide the two, there does exist a gap. It's around 80%. You have to ask yourself, well, that doesn't really measure anything other than the median income. So is that measuring economic value that may not be reflected in wages? Is that reflecting economic value that we place on hours worked? Personally, I don't think it is fair to say, okay, well, I'm working 40 hours a week, this person's working 30 hours a week, and we're doing the same work, we have the same experience and same education. Why should we get paid the same? I think personally that the person working more, all else being equal, should get paid more. And so we as a society have determined that equal pay for equal work is important. And so the wage gap doesn't really reflect per se that we're not paying for equal work for equal pay, because it's just taking median incomes. It calculates nothing more. However, it is a statistic that does exist. If there are economic values that are placed between men and women, that decisions lead to activities that keep women away from earning as much as men, which obviously if the median income shows that, there must be some explanation. So we need to examine, why does it exist? And then we need to ask ourselves the tough question, is it a problem that is real, and is it cause for concern? And so what I'd like to take now is a deeper look into statistics that actually compare apples to apples instead of having a gross simplification of the problem. The wage gap's not the correct statistic to look at. It's a great one to have a starting point, but it's not the end-all be-all. Now, of course, it is really easy for me, being a male, to talk about this and say there's no problem, but that's not how I look at it. So the issue is not whether a gap exists or not, it's whether or not it's a consequence of some systemic issue in society, somewhat analogous to discrimination between African Americans and how we have affirmative action in this country. Do we have an obligation to make things equitable? And I think not. Now, people and families are all different, but in aggregate, we do still value the trade-offs between men and women in familial roles. Let's say if everything was equal, is there a wage gap? Well, you might be surprised in that not really. So single men and women, the gender wage gap is about 2.5%. The data, most recent data, is 2.8%. That's statistically insignificant. Now with married people, and when you're married, generally family follows, not everybody, but in aggregate, the wage gap is the largest. It's higher than 25%. So when we're looking at married couples with families or starting families, those are decisions that households make. Now if we're all equal and single people have their own careers, doing their own thing, and not having a family, of course, in aggregate, the wage gap is really non-existent. Now, when we're talking about men and women and single versus married, we should look deeper in that and say, well, why does that 2.8%, insignificant as it may be, why does that exist? Well, if we look at the total degrees given in this country, and women actually earn over 50% of them. The 10 highest paying degrees and the 10 lowest paying degrees, are they majority male or female? And not surprisingly, 9 out of the 10 top paying degrees are men dominated fields, and then 9 out of 10 of the lowest paying are female dominated. So it's not necessarily a discrimination of sorts, it's choices that people have made. And so when people are starting a career, generally the higher demand degrees are the ones that are going to get paid more. And it turns out that the hottest degrees are male dominated. And this all comes down to wanting to have your cake and eat it too. Because if we really want to address the wage gap, and when I talk about the wage gap, I'm talking about the absolute calculation, these male-dominated majors and career choices now have to be 50-50. And so that takes away individual choice. And likewise, with the lower-paying majors that are female-dominated, that kind of diminishes the value of individual choice and what individuals and families value themselves. So of course, when we're staying at home raising children, we exit the workforce a little bit. And there's no value on that. We're not getting paid, but it doesn't mean it's not economically driven, because there are trade-offs to staying out of the workforce and help raise a family. And so we have to realize that and come to terms with that, because that is the crux of the issue. It's individual choices, and it's also exiting the workforce for a period of time to help raise a family. And of course right now it's more female dominated. Females generally stay home, but those are individual choices. But when we actually have single people choosing to focus on a career, the wage gap really doesn't exist. And when it does, even a little bit, it's all because of choice choices made in terms of career path. So we can't have our cake and eat it too as a society. The aggregate decisions by individual people, when taken together, do matter, and they reflect themselves in the wage gap. Can we really argue about it? Is it really an issue? I don't think so. It's much bigger than some active form of discrimination. To conclude here, I think we need to go back to basics. I mean, I have a lot of things written down on that PowerPoint. It all goes down to one question. Do individual choices matter? And if you say no, then maybe the wage gap is something worth fighting for. But as a society and in a free market economy, individual choices do matter. In the world we live in, that's why I think the wage gap is not a fight worth having, because we as people and families, we make the best decisions in an aggregate that reflects itself in macroeconomic data such as the wage gap. And those issues can't really be explained by one simple number. And so when we expand it and look a little bit deeper into the individual facets, we see that the wage gap really does not exist, and that's very clear. So when we're talking about an aggregate look at the economy, I think that individual choices matter, and they are just reflecting themselves in numbers that show that the median income of women is not the same as the median income of men. But individually, people are free to make their own choices and pursue their own dreams, have children if they want, whatever makes you happy. And that's the beauty of our country, luckily. There is no root problem, and that's why I think this is an obsolete fight. So I thank you for your time, your patience, going through this with me. And I look forward to everybody else's thoughts, feedback. I really have enjoyed researching this. So I thank you again, and take care.